Okay, so on this Tales from the Vault, I'm going to tell you the story of my grandparents and how they met. And it's like a two-parter because it gets pretty long. And first part of the story and the second part, when they go together, teaches a really good lesson. So, a little background on my grandparents. Personally, my parents were a little too immature to have kids. Uh, and thank God my grandparents took me in. I still live with my mom, but basically my grandparents took a lot of time and showed me a lot of things. They were the only solid relationship I saw growing up. Um, Grandpa kind of showed me what it was like when a man loves a woman, how things are supposed to work, and how to worship your woman properly. Do everything for her that she wants. Compromise, work through things. So it was very good influence on me. As a kid, I can remember staying over there when I was young, and I'd spend the night in what used to be my uncle's bedroom in the front of the house. My grandfather was deaf. He wasn't born that way, but after doing World War II infantry at Iwo Jima, they didn't have any hearing protection. So when he come home, he had very damaged hearing, and it was short lived. It only lasted 10ish years, and it was gone. So every night when they would go to bed, Grandpa would tell Grandma everything he had done on the farm that day. He thought that maybe if something happened overnight and he didn't wake up, she needed to know exactly the where everything was at, as far as if he's paid any bills, did he go create any bills, did he go buy something, and that way, if he didn't wake up, she knew exactly how to take over, because Grandma was really good at taking over things and doing things for him. So let's get to how they meet. My grandfather was a child of the Depression. He was actually pretty old during the Depression. He was in the ninth grade when it started. And his father walked off from the farm. Everything was pretty bad. He took it upon himself to quit school and do whatever was needed to help his mama raise his 7 brothers and sisters. He was the oldest, so he would go out, work hard, try to get any money he could, and give to his mama. After a series of odd jobs and everything else in the world he could come up with to do, he finally heard that if he was to join the army, not only would they pay all of his living expenses, but they would send a monthly check home, and he could send that to his mom and help his brothers and sisters out. So he signs up for the military before anybody's drafted in World War II. He also told me that he had heard about this guy named Hitler, and he thought that there's a large chance there could be a problem with him and we may end up in a war. So he thought if he was already in the service and trained, he'd have an easier time at things, which worked out in his favor in some ways. So this is before World War II. Grandpa went to basic training in Georgia in the Army, and then he got stationed in California, some battalion. After being stationed there, he found out he had a chance to come home and see his mama, but the only way home was to take a train across the U.S., and they would take him to Richmond, and then he'd have to find a way to get from Richmond down to like Fuquay-Varina. And he also had another job he had to do on his way home. He had gave a girl a promise ring, met a girl, really liked her. She was a really prime, nice lady. But Grandpa said that the longer he was thinking about it, because her father was like a storekeep and was a businessman, that the longer things went along, he was like, if I want to be a farmer, which is what he wanted to do, no matter how successful he was in farming, he was scared it would not give her the type of life she was accustomed to and the type of life she wanted. He was scared that on his best years, she would only be level of where she was with her dad, not excelling like most kids want to always do better than their parents. So he thought about it and was just going to go give her a full apology and tell her he was sorry, face to face, wrote her a letter, everything. So he gets to Richmond. He's got a buddy in the VA hospital, and the guy had been injured pretty bad. Something had happened, and so Grandpa hung out with him for most of the day. While he's hanging out with him, He's getting attended to by a nurse. Grandpa talks to the nurse, and he's like, "Hey, where are you from?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm from North Carolina." He's like, "Oh, me too. Where at?" And she tells him this little town, Meadow, Johnson County. And Grandpa goes, "Okay, well, I'm from like the edge of Fuquay-Varina." She's like, "Oh, that's not that far apart, you know." So she tells him this wonderful story about growing up on this farm and how her dad is and what the farm's like and her brothers and sisters, and it just sounds magical to Grandpa. He thought, man, she come from the right place. Anyway, Grandpa's thumbing down 301. He's in full army dress. A farmer picks him up because in those days, if somebody was in full dress, you're supposed to assist a soldier. So this farmer picks him up, and now in the truck is the farmer, his younger daughter, and my grandpa. And as they're driving, he's asking the farmer's asking my grandfather some questions. You know, where are you from? What's your story? Blah blah blah. And he tells them, but Grandpa keeps looking at this young girl beside him. Now I say young. Grandpa was 25. She's 15. They were 10 years apart. But he keeps looking at her, kind of shakes his head while he's talking. And this girl notices it. So after like the third time of him shaking his head, she goes, "Is there a problem? Can I help you with something?" And he says, I just have to ask you a question. You've got to be kin to Dot Tart. And Grandma said, just cold chills run down her body. She's like, that's my sister. How do you know my sister? He's like, well, your sister is the nurse to my buddy in Richmond. And Grandma's like, oh man, what a small world. Okay. So a little background on the nursing thing. My great-grandfather built the Catholic Church in Newton Grove. With that, they also built a parsonage. And nurses or nuns came in and they were educating kids. And so kind of a benefit was the women in that section of my family all got taught by nurses or taught by nuns, really well educated. Then they got into a program to where if they would become a nurse, they'd get free college education and they would go serve their time. And like the VA hospital in Richmond was the popular place. Like two of my aunts had done that. Two of my mom's aunts. So I'm weird because me being a grandkid and kind of thought of as a child, I get confused sometimes. I skip generations accidentally because most people call me a kid even though I'm technically a grandchild. So back to the story. Grandpa's talking to her more than this farmer wants him talking to her. So the farmer gets to the next intersection, stops the truck, and says, "Son, this is where you get out." And Grandpa says, "Well, I thought you were going to this town." He said, "I was. I changed my mind, son. That's where you get out." Grandpa said, "Thank you." And he gets out of the truck, and he never lets go of that door handle. He shuts the door, thinks for like a half second, opens it back up, looks at that young girl, and he says, "This is going to sound really bad. I got to go to Dunn and give a girl back her ring and tell her I'm sorry because I made a mistake. But when I leave there tonight, if you'll tell me your address, I'll go be at your house for sundown." And before her father could tell her to shut her mouth, my grandma spits out her address. Grandpa's there by dusk to see her. Now, Grandpa then talks to her, everything else, and ends up, he has to go back. He's got to go back and pull his time in service. But when he gets back, they court for like 2 years, and then boom, they can get married. And he wanted nobody else but her, worshiped nobody else but her, thought there was no other woman in the world but her. So that's how that happens. Grandpa was kind of worried because, there was an age difference, and he was scared that her family wouldn't accept him properly. And they did. It took a little time, but they accepted him. So one day, they're having a Thanksgiving dinner at his wife's parents' house. And the big news in town is Aunt Sarah. If you're around Johnston County, you know Sarah Margaret. Her name is Sarah Margaret Tart, but they called her Sal Margaret. So anyway, Sal Margaret's coming into town from the VA hospital to see the family for the holiday. So everybody's at Mom and Dad's house and waiting for her sister to come in. It's a joyous time. Grandpa's sitting there and everything's good. And all of a sudden, through the windows of the house, my grandfather can see his brother's car pulling in the driveway. So you may know what that means. The car wasn't too uncommon of a car, so Grandpa's like, nah. Sure enough, everybody starts yelling, oh, Sam Margaret's here with her boyfriend. Sam Margaret's here with her boyfriend. Grandpa goes, a guy could drive the same car. Sarah gets out on one side. He sees this tall, dark-headed guy get out on the other side, and Grandpa goes, oh, man. Now, Uncle Robert was divorced before he met Sarah. And in those days, it was taboo. So it's a little drama, you know. Grandpa goes running to Grandma, and he's like, find your daddy. Tell him I don't know nothing about this. I ain't got nothing to do with this. I got nothing to do with this. This has nothing to do with me. I have not told my brother to date your sister. They end up getting married. They have kids too. So 2 brothers married 2 sisters. And we have a whole line of cousins that are somewhat genetically or biologically, if you took blood tests, they're like brothers and sisters because the same male genetics are going into the same female genetics on both sides. We got a wonderful but unique family. Now we'll get ready for part 2.